Thank you, Noah, for putting this together in such a short period of time, and also thank you, Dr. Ofer, for your bravery and speaking truth to power in tumultuous times and difficult times, especially when saying the honest things can lead to you getting not only, you've already been suspended from the Knesset, but also maybe even jailed, as far as I understand it, under this new coalition government's changes.
First of all, good evening, everybody. Thanks for hosting me. I'm really delighted to speak to you. Look, at the moment, members of the Knesset in Israel, me included, enjoying immunity. But under this government, which is a full-fledged fascist government, who knows for how long that would be sustained, because there are many changes, laws, but not only laws, also the public discourse and everything under the smoke screen of the war. So it's much more easier on this government to pursue with some endeavors that it had before the massacre in the south of Israel. So who knows? At the moment, I'm not in Israel anyway, but the danger is still there. You know, and when you ask me, and when I have the chance, I shall explain in length what's going on in Israel at the moment. Okay, so first of all, I would like to begin, and of course, there's no other way as far as I'm concerned, with a total 1,000% condemnation of the massacre that Hamas carried out in the south of Israel. I mean, there's no justification, to say the least. That's an understatement for such a carnage, for such a slaughter of innocent civilians, mostly kids, children, babies, women, youngsters, elderly, etc. This is something that no human being can tolerate, let alone accept. I personally lost a very good friend of mine who wrote to me a WhatsApp message just literally short time before she was killed with her husband by the Hamas terrorists in her kibbutz. I know some other people who were kidnapped and killed, acquaintances, because first, 40 years ago, I lived in a kibbutz in the area, one of the kibbutzim that was seriously assaulted by Hamas. So obviously I know some people from there who were kidnapped and killed. Secondly, I used to teach as a professor in a college nearby, which was also some of its workers and professors live in the area, and they too, some of them, unfortunately, were slaughtered and kidnapped. And eventually, around the area, especially in kibbutzim, but not only, there are a lot of activists against Israeli occupation and the siege on Gaza. And of course, I know them for many years from the activism against those. And unfortunately, some of them also killed and kidnapped. So, on top of the moral and political disgust at the carnage that Hamas carried out, there's also a personal layer which fills me with pain and sorrow and rage. Unfortunately, as opposed to the majority, I do not allow my rage to take control over me. I would like, if I may, to refer to a good friend of mine. And by the way, I have some friends in Gaza too, and I talked to some of them, and obviously they are viciously attacked as well. And I shall refer to it in a second. But perhaps our viewers and you remember Dr. Azzadin El-Ayash from Jabalia refugee camp in Gaza, who his house was bombarded by Israel in 2009, in which 3 of his daughters and a niece were killed. He lost in one bomb 3 daughters and niece, and another daughter was wounded, and some other family members. He continued ever since to be a man of peace. He wrote a book that was published in 2011, which is not accidentally entitled, I Shall Not Hate, and he refused to hate. I talked to him 3 days ago. He now lives in Canada since the disaster that happened to him. He lost 25 family members in the last bombarding of Israel in the last few days. 25 family members, in addition to 3 daughters and niece who were killed 14 years ago. He still says, I shall not hate. So I try to follow his example, because that's a humane example, to say the least. So with all the rage and pain, I refuse to hate the Palestinians. because it's not their guilt. The vast majority of the Palestinians are innocent civilians who just want to live freely, something that they cannot enjoy of because of the ongoing occupation, almost 60 years. Now, having said all that, and being very clear, blunt, and sharp in my opposition to the carnage, to the slaughter, to the criminal massacre carried out by Hamas, that's not to justify the massacre that Israel carries out now. And there's no other way but to describe it as a massacre. Any other intention to describe it in other, sugar-coated terms won't work. More than 3,000 people were killed in Gaza. Most of them, the vast majority, innocent civilians, not Hamas terrorists, kids, babies, women. You must be a vicious person to justify it or to turn your back on them. You must be a terribly cynical politician or a totally immoral person. I refuse to be like that. So I care about every human being, Israelis and Palestinians, Arabs and Jews, and of course, everywhere in the world. And that's the reason that I'm insisting in being against the assault carried out by Israel. And I refuse to accept the sugar-coated excuses. And I refuse to hate the Palestinians just because they're Palestinians. I'm not talking about, of course, the Hamas terrorists and murderers. I'm talking about the Palestinian people. They deserve to have a good life.
Yeah, I wanted to ask specifically a bit about the conditions that you and I had spoken just a bit ago about in Israel that you were concerned about and warning about. A degree of political, almost disintegration that you warned of, talking with me, that is really not adequately appreciated and points to, even greater levels of violence coming than that which we've already seen.
Yes, so that's exactly what I wanted to say after that very long, perhaps too long introduction. I'm sorry. I must say that although my main experience is as a professor at the university, in the last 2 weeks, almost 2 weeks, I'm very emotional, given what I said before, given the loss of good friends and acquaintances and the bloodshed in general that I simply cannot stand. I have nightmares, That's not to make me a victim. I'm not a victim. I'm very lucky where I am. But I still have nightmares because I cannot stop thinking or dreaming about my friends and about all the victims. And by the way, when I say victims, I'm talking about all victims. I'm talking about the people in Israel. I'm talking about the people in Gaza. I also am talking about the people in the West Bank that are quite neglected in the international, as far as the international attention is concerned. But what's going on there, it's also a wide range killing. But going back to your question, I was suspended for 45 days, beginning today, I think, from the Knesset sessions and committees because of what I said. And what I said is very simple. I said 3 basic things which I do not regret, and I shall never retreat from them because I think those are truth. First, that Israel does carry out a massacre. As I said before, there's no other way to describe it. And that doesn't say anything about underestimating the massacre that Hamas carried out. Obviously, no one should and must not underestimate the carnage, the slaughter that Hamas carried out. Absolutely. But that doesn't mean that we should ignore, let alone justify, even if implicitly, the massacre that the government of Israel carries out. That's one thing that I said, and the ethics committee found it, unreasonable, unaccepted, or whatever you like to call it. Secondly, I said that the government of Israel was interested in violence. I want to explain this in a bit further details. I have never said, and I do not say, that the government of Israel, although it is a fascist government, consists of racists. I mean, people who seriously believe in Jewish supremacy and in racial theory. You find an example to compare to in history. I won't say anything about it, but I do not say that anyone in this fascist government wanted the carnage that Hamas carried out against Israelis. I do not say that, and I didn't say that. What I did say, and still cling to my analysis, this is a political and, if you like, historical perception. What I did say, and I would like to say again, is that the government of Israel wanted one or another sort of violence, not to the extent that happened in the south of Israel. That's not what I'm saying, and that's not what I'm implying, and that's not what I'm thinking. But I do insist in saying that the government of Israel wanted some kind of violence to abuse, if you like, to manipulate in order to pursue its vicious fascist policy. Now, what do I mean by that? And here, if you allow me, I hope I can do it briefly, I cannot assure you. Everybody knows that the government of Israel has been trying for a few months to pursue and to execute a coup. Sometimes in the international media, it was referred to as a judicial reform. That was not a judicial reform. That was not even a judicial coup. It was a coup d'etat, to the extent that the government wanted to destroy the democratic components, and I emphasize democratic components because I have no intention to say that Israel is a democratic state. In my view, it is not, for many reasons that, if you like, we can refer to later. But it does have some democratic components or democratic elements. One of them, until now, more or less, is the separation of the judicial authority from the executive and the legislature. And I emphasize the judicial from the other two because there's no really, in Israel, in the parliamentary system, there's no real separation between the executive and the legislator or the legislative. But there is, in the Israeli system, a separation between the judicial and the other two. The government in Israel, given the parliamentary system, already controls the Knesset, the parliament. So it can achieve whatever it likes, it can block whatever it likes. The government controls the Knesset, and that was the case ever since the state was established. It's not under this specific government specifically. So one of the main checks and balances to limit the power of the government has been the judicial system, and to a lesser extent, some other informal authorities like the press, like the civil society, etc. The government of Israel wanted to pursue, to execute, to realize a coup d'etat to the extent that they wanted to eliminate totally the independence of the judicial system, as well as of the media, and to seriously undermine the rights, individual rights and group rights, etc., and to demolish to a great extent the civil society. Those were in order to turn the government into an omnipotent authority, something that is not limited at all, that can do whatever it likes. Why is it so important to understand that? Because everything that I just mentioned was not the goal, was not the end. That was the means. The means to what? To what, one may ask. The means to realize the fascist plan of Smotrich's called the Subjugation plan. Smotrich published, you can Google and find it, this plan in 2017 when he was a member of the Knesset. Now he's a minister in the Ministry of Defense as well as the Minister of Finance. A very influential minister, of course. And the subjugation plan boils down to three. First, Israel shall annex the all Palestinian occupied territories. That means primarily the West Bank, without granting rights to the Palestinians, primarily not political rights to vote and be elected. That means, in other words, apartheid regime. Second, those Palestinians who are not going to accept their lot as subjects rather than citizens are going to be expelled from their homeland. Thirdly, those Palestinians who are going to resist are going, in Smotrich's terms, going to be taken care by the army. That means they are going to be killed. Those are the main three components of the subjugation plan. This government of Israel wanted to realize that and understood that as long as there is a relatively independent judicial system and press, and civil society consists of many human rights organizations and individual rights like freedom of speech, freedom of movement, freedom of association, etc., the chances to realize this plan are very slim. So in order to realize this plan, which is the end, they used the coup d'etat as a means. They failed, especially thanks to the massive demonstrations and protests in the street of Israel, to a lesser extent because of some international, I wouldn't like to say pressure, so perhaps, how should I call it? Hints about the future or something like that. And I also have to say that some, divisions within the Israeli military and that they frightened Netanyahu, the economic crisis that was very, that it was clear that it's just around the corner. We began to see its seeds. So for these and some other reasons, they failed. They looked for an alternative. History, unfortunately, shows that in Israel, the best means to achieve something that the government wants and doesn't succeed to achieve is as a security tension, and its peak is violence or war. In that sense, and in that sense only, I argue that the government of Israel wanted to encounter a security problem, a violent one, perhaps even war, and under the smoke of that, to pursue and realize the plan, the subjugation plan of Smotrich's. And I emphasize again for the third or fourth time because it's immensely important for me. I do not imply, let alone argue, that Israel, the government of Israel, wanted the massacre that Hamas did. No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that Israel was interested in a sort of violence to a much lesser extent that unfortunately happened. And by the way, the government of Israel did as much as it could to ignite fire. And I give you two examples. One example is the ongoing attacks on Syria. And secondly, which is even more common, is the ongoing pogroms carried out by settlers in the West Bank against Palestinians, innocent Palestinians, mainly pastors, very poor communities of pastors, especially in the Jordan Valley, but not only. I've been there, I visited them. And there were, in the last few months, pogroms of those fanatic bigots against Palestinians. That means that they torched their fields, they cut their trees, they set fire in their houses, they killed Palestinians. No one, by the way, was arrested or charged. They got green line from the government to assault and even kill Palestinians. That was before the massacre of the Hamas. And I personally warned at the plenum of the Knesset in official letters that I can introduce, and I posted, in the Facebook, at least 10 letters in the last 8 or 9 months I sent to the Minister of Defense of Israel warning that those pogroms should be ended and stopped, and the people who commit them should be arrested and charged, first and foremost because those are crimes, but secondly because everything is going to erupt. People cannot live under such conditions for long. Up till now, I haven't got even one reply from the minister, not even a laconic one of got it. Nothing. Total overlook. And to add to that, of course, Gaza has been under siege for 16 years. That's a volcano. That's a volcano. And again, that doesn't justify whatsoever the slaughter that Hamas carried out. But we have to understand the context, not to justify what Hamas said, perish the thought, but to understand how to prevent it and how should we go forward to stop this bloodshed. That's the goal of my words. Israel now using the terrible massacre that Hamas did, not only to attack Gaza, but to realize the subjugation plan by using 3 different strategies. First is the strategy vis-a-vis Gaza, which is a massacre. This is, to assault Gaza and destroy Gaza and drive out the Palestinians, if not from the Gaza Strip as a whole, at least from some parts of it, from the north to the south, for instance, because that was not an evacuation, what Israel said. It was a forced expulsion. So this is one strategy, which is part of the subjugation plan. The second strategy is in the West Bank and to some extent in East Jerusalem. And here is the ongoing pogroms I mentioned before, but now there's a systematic killing by settlers. Just a few days ago, settlers got into the Palestinian village of Kusra, murdered 4 Palestinians, and went away. Nobody stopped them. Nobody prevented them from doing so. Nobody arrested them afterwards, let alone charged or prosecute them. They did what they want. And at the funeral of those 4, the day after, the settlers came again and shot at the mourning people in the funeral and killed the father and the son. And of course, the army is also attacking Palestinians. So there are dozens of Palestinian dead in the West Bank as well. This is the other strategy of ethnic cleansing. And by the way, the area I visited before the war and the massacre began, about 3 weeks ago, I think it was, I visited the Jordan Valley, as I said before, and I realized that 6 pastors, communities, were already ethnically cleansed. We're talking about the size double of Tel Aviv. Some may think that the pastor is just, 1.5 kilometers. No, an area in the size of double of Tel Aviv was ethnically cleansed before the massacre. The third strategy, and here I answers more, or to the point, if you like to say, to Noach's question, is within Israel. Within Israel, at the moment, there are provocations carried out specifically by the Ben Gvir, the minister of so-called internal security. And today, first of all, there's a distribution, the continuous distribution of arms, of guns and rifles, etc. They are distributed widely. There's a decree issued by the Ben Gvir. Ben Gvir, you should understand, is one of the disciples of Kahana, who was described by Likud members of Knesset at the 40 years ago as a Nazi. It's not me who said that, but Likud members of Knesset. So he is one of his disciples. He is an admirer of Baruch Goldstein, a mass murderer who killed 29 Muslims while they were praying in El Khalil, in Hebron. That's the minister that now issued a decree that allows people to get arms very easily. Surprise, surprise, a great amount of those people who got the arms are people of Ben Gvir's. And so they have the instruments, they have the ability now to attack. Secondly, they have the motivation, given the provocation, given the smoke screen of the war, etc. And thirdly, they know exactly, they've got the targets. On the social network, there are groups, for instance, WhatsApp groups,
Telegram,
that indicate with names and addresses what are the targets that they should target. And because of that, all the circumstances and all the infrastructure for a mass murder of Arabs, citizens of Israel, and democratic or progressive or leftist Jews, the conditions are already there. It's just a matter of time before they get the D-Day, before they reach the D-Day, or before they get the okay or go forward. That's something that should be understood because it's just around the corner. And in addition, and that would be my last argument in this, as far as the last question is concerned, now it is in Israel forbidden to demonstrate, for instance. Today, the police brutally didn't allow a demonstration, a peaceful demonstration against the war, not supporting Hamas, absolutely not, of course not. No one can support the Hamas and this mass murder organization, absolutely not. The people wanted, Jews and Arabs together, wanted to demonstrate in Haifa and other places against the war, to express sympathy to the people of Gaza, as well as to the people of Israel who were slaughtered and their families were kidnapped. The police brutally didn't allow it. And the chief of the police announced today that protests and demonstration are forbidden. The only democracy in the Middle East, you understand? But it's not only that, it is also forbidden to express sympathy to the dead children, to the killed children of Gaza. It's forbidden. It's forbidden to oppose the war on the social networks. People are arrested and interrogated by police for posting anti-war posts or for tweeting sympathy or empathy for the people who are killed in Gaza. They are arrested and interrogated for that. People have been fired from their workplace or at least suspended because of the same thing. Students have been suspended by academic institutions, universities and colleges for the same thing. This is a running amok fascism. And of course, the peak was not the peak because it's more important, but because of the circumstances that I've been suspended from the Knesset and cannot enjoy my own freedom of speech. Because what is my freedom of speech as of any other member of the Knesset or parliament? I was elected to represent and express the views of specific people who support my political views. I was not elected to express views which I do not endorse, and they don't allow me to do so. They actually shut my mouth, although they try to use other excuses. But basically, in the bottom line, in the end of the day, they are preventing me from raising my voice against the war, against violence of all sides, against to express sympathy for the people of the innocent people of Gaza, and to struggle for a peaceful solution to this terrible bloodshed. That's for the sake of Israelis and Palestinians alike. They incite against me and they present me as if I was anti-Semite, self-hatred Jew, anti-Israeli. I am not. That's not, I'm not apologetic. I just express my real views. My views are for peace and security and prosperity for everyone. That's what Israel needs too. So am I anti-Israeli because I'm against war that harms Israelis as well, let alone Palestinians? No, I'm struggling for everybody, for Palestinians and Israelis alike. And nobody ever will prevent me from doing so. That's it. I finish with my speech. Sorry.
Doctor, I have some questions for you about what the overarching political opinions are in Israel, as far as what we've seen so far is an 85% disapproval of the Netanyahu coalition government leading up to the war cabinet. Not the war cabinet in itself, but the prior formation of the government. It seems like Netanyahu ran as a security candidate time and time again. Obviously, Likud is far right, and yet his security promise has been an abject failure, partially because of the things that you so perfectly laid out, crushing the Palestinian Authority and not treating the Palestinian Authority as an equal partner, but simply a collaborator or simply just a vestige of an Israeli security apparatus in the West Bank that is crushing Palestinians, and also simultaneously propping up Hamas as the singular force to negotiate with, oftentimes through violent means. It seemingly has been a disastrous failure, as you also pointed out. Is there any appetite for change on the ground, or does it seem like people want more of the exact same type of violent retribution, especially as similar violent conditions time and time again with numerous sieges on Gaza have yielded only a demonstrably worse security outcome for Israelis in general?
First of all, thanks for mentioning something that I forgot, which is indeed very important, that throughout the years, and let's not forget Netanyahu, apart from a very short time last year, has been the prime minister for consecutive 13 years or 14 years. So Netanyahu not only supported the Hamas by, transferring money, real money, cash, millions to Hamas, and as you say, and simultaneously crushing the Palestinian Authority. He actually, in 2019, in a meeting of the Likud's party, he actually explicitly said that everybody who doesn't want or opposes a Palestinian independent state must prefer or prioritize the Hamas over the Palestinian Authority. So he's the one who actually did everything to strengthen Hamas. By the way, many years ago, what was his name there? He was afterwards the ambassador, the American ambassador to Israel, Dan Kretzmel, I don't remember his family name.
What, Kurtzer?
But he warned Israel. Better, that's it, sorry.
Kurtzer, yeah, sorry.
So he actually warned the government of Israel more than 20 years ago, or perhaps even almost 30 years ago. Yeah, I think it was in the beginning of the 90s when Rabin still was prime minister. He warned the government of Israel not to prefer the Hamas over the PLO, and that Israel is going to pay a very high price for that. And they didn't want to listen to him. He was right. We can see it now. So very important, you mentioned it before. But going back to your question, I think that we should refer to three different aspects. First, there is a hardcore of Bibists, that is supporters of Netanyahu, and not Likud people. When I call them Bibists, that's everybody knows that the nickname of Netanyahu is Bibi. So Bibists is a name of a group that worship Netanyahu, not the Likud. They simply worship him. There's a personal worship in that sense. There's nothing to speak with them. They will support whatever Netanyahu does whatsoever. But within the Likud party, those who are not, Bibists, there's a lot of disdain now. I don't believe that Netanyahu is going to survive politically this event. I don't know exactly when and how that's going to happen, but I don't believe that he's going to politically survive it. I believe that's the end of Netanyahu politically, because within the Likud and the parties, the right wing surrounding the Likud, including many voters in the South, they explicitly said since the massacre in the South, said that they feel that Netanyahu's government and Netanyahu himself neglected them for years. So I believe that in that sense, Netanyahu is a dead horse, as it were. That's one thing. Secondly, there are some people who've been against Netanyahu and his government for a few months, those who participated in the massive demonstrations against him and the government. But now some of them joined the government into a so-called emergency government. So they actually legitimize the government and Netanyahu, even if they at the same time they talk and speak against him. So that's another thing that we should pay attention to. I think that at the moment, the main incentive of the government and of the vast majority of the population in Israel, and I said that in pain, I'm sorry about that, is revenge. People are outraged, people are hurt. Those are human, natural feelings. But as I said in my words at the beginning, I think that those should not control us, so take control over our reason. But the government, the vast majority, unfortunately, do follow the guts. And now revenge is the main thing that drives them. So at the moment, I'm not very optimistic. I'm very afraid of more blood that is going to be spilled, as I just indicated before, primarily in Gaza, especially if troops are going to enter. It's going to be a terrible carnage of Palestinians, but of Israeli soldiers as well. And obviously, as I said before, I don't want anyone to be hurt, neither Palestinians nor Israelis. So if they enter Gaza, the troops, that's going to be terrible. At the same time, I imagine that the missiles on Israel are going to go stronger. Perhaps, I hope not. Perhaps. And it seems that it begins already. Hezbollah from the north is going to join. Perhaps, again, I hope not. Iran is going to join. That may very end, as I said before, the fascist militias that are organized within Israel under the auspices of Israeli police and the minister, Ben Gvir, are going to get a greener light to attack democratic Jews and Palestinian citizens. That's going to be a terrible bloodshed That's going to lead to rivers of blood. And I'm afraid that we are on the brink of that. If the international community, and especially the United States, not because I like it or not, because they have the power, if they are not going to stop it now, and unfortunately, following what President Biden said today, it seems he's not interested in doing that. I'm afraid that everybody is going to drown in rivers of blood. And of course, I'm saying that not in order to pose, afraid, of course not, but not even, kind of desperate. No, I'm saying that because I want it to be prevented. I want to save lives. I'm saying that because I care about the lives of my compatriots in Israel and of Palestinians. That's the reason I'm saying that. Not security drives the Israeli government now, neither the Israeli public as it most, but revenge. Everybody knows that that security is not going to be delivered by war and violence. Exactly the opposite. Mahatma Gandhi said that eye for an eye turns everybody blind. And the metaphor is clear. I don't have to, explain it further. And the only way to stop the bloodshed and to stop it for good is a political, peaceful solution, not a military and not a violent one. And the only solution, real and viable solution, is the ending the occupation and establishing of Palestinian independent state in the West Bank, Gaza Strip, and East Jerusalem alongside Israel. That's the only way to stop the bloodshed. And I hope that that will be reached very soon. Otherwise, the death toll is going to be immense. And by the way, it's not only a call for justice, it's also a reference to the interests of the world. Because if the war is going to spread to other parts in the region, and apparently that's what's going to happen if it continues. Again, I hope not, but I'm afraid of that. Eventually, it's going to spread to the whole world. We are on the brink of a third world war, and it's in the hands of the international community to prevent it, and they should.
So one question that I still have, though, is that is there a real appetite beyond when people become more reasonable, not maybe in the immediate aftermath of a massacre, but down the line, it doesn't seem like there is interest in it, what you mentioned, a two-state solution from the Palestinian side, at least now, which I think is understandable, and it doesn't seem like there is one in the Israeli side as well. But my question more so was almost a spiritual one, as far as like, do people not see that? And I guess I'm using Smotrich's own terminology when he was describing his own vision of a one-state solution, but not in the way that most people refer to it, when he said, in the words of Albert Einstein, trying the same things over and over again and expecting a different result is the definition of insanity. Don't people recognize that violence begets violence, and ultimately the maintenance of the regime that is so brutal and has subjugated Palestinians for so long is the reason why this violence is occurring? Is there a part in that 85% disapproval that recognizes that? Is there a viable coalition for that? Is there any kind of political momentum that is demanding change? Because as you also pointed out, there were a lot of peace activists in the kibbutzim that openly came out while they were already in the Dead Sea hotels they were at, recovering from the horrifying atrocities that they had just experienced while their friends and family members were being buried. They had the bravery to go out and speak to the media and say, this is happening as a consequence of the violence that Palestinians were subjected to, and we have to put an end to it. There were family members that went on both Israeli television and went on American television to say, I despise the fact that the Israeli government is using my friend's death and not giving me an offer, not giving me a moment of solace, not giving me a moment of grievance to sit there in peace, and using their likeness and using their death as a way to further their agenda, when they would be horrified at that, when they fought their entire lives against that. Are there people that are willing to see this?
It's true, and to some of those very brave people that you mentioned that really survived the inferno, I talked to some of them, encouraging them, expressing my solidarity, my support, and everything. So there is a peace movement in Israel, It's not very strong, unfortunately, for quite a long time for different reasons that we cannot address at the moment. But it still does exist. I mentioned before that only today there was an attempt to organize a demonstration that was brutally, disallowed by the police. The police forbids demonstrations and protests because why they forbid it? Because there are people who are actually want to protest. There was no need to protest if there were no people that wanted to protest. So, of course, the peace movement is alive and kicking, although it's wounded and hurt, and it shall forever exist and overcome as well among the survivors of the carnage in the south. But at the moment, as I said before, they are brutally and forcibly shot by the government and the police. But of course, they exist. They will continue, because I'm part of it, of course, to raise our voice and to try to convince the people that revenge is not the answer. As I said before, rage and pain are very basic human feelings, senses. Obviously, someone who saw such a carnage in front of his eyes, or saw the pictures, or whatever, of course, that rage and pain are very natural. But as I said before, there's a difference between feeling something and translating the feelings into an action. That's one of the things that distinguish between human beings and beasts, that we are not acting upon instincts solely or primarily, that we are part of our humanity. Modern philosophers would have said that probably that's the main characteristics of human beings, is that we can use our reason, and we have to struggle that everybody will understand that, will adopt that, will understand that revenge and violence are not only morally wrong, but also are fruitless, to say the least. They are destructive, and that if we all want, and I assume that everybody wants, that one and one's children live in peace and security and prosperity, the only way to do so is to reach a reasonable peace solution, so both peoples will be able to live in peace and security. If one people suffers, the other will suffer. There is a symbiosis between the Palestinians and the Israelis. And as I said before, it doesn't matter what price I have to pay. I am loyal to those values. I'm committed to my compatriots and to the Palestinians in the occupied territories. And as part of this commitment, I continue with my struggle for both peoples and for justice. Even if they try to shut my mouth time and time again, I will never surrender.
Thank you for your bravery and your unwavering moral clarity in this situation. One other question I have is, I guess, in situations like this, I often look to labor movements, labor unions in particular. I know that Israel does have a relatively, in comparison to the American labor movement at least, a relatively robust one. And I'm wondering, I know the Labor Party in and of itself is Zionist and has, of course, similar designs, maybe not as aggressive or as violent as the maintenance of the conditions in West Bank as like Likud. But I'm wondering, is there any coalition to create? Is there any interest in Israeli labor, maybe not necessarily the Labor Party in general, but like labor unions to demand a change, not necessarily just for liberal reforms to ensure the maintenance of to ensure that there is still a secular judiciary, but one that goes beyond that, that truly examines the problem at the core?
Look, let's begin with the Labour Party. The Labour Party it's not accidental that the Labour Party is smaller than us in the parliament at the moment. The Labour Party has only 4 seats out of 120 in the Knesset. Why? Because the Labour Party long ago, just, I would say, left, or not left, but it's a kind of a bankruptcy, a value bankruptcy of the Labour Party. And I mean by that they too many times try to imitate the Likud in its competition to power. Instead of expressing, instead of introducing an alternative to the Likud, the Labour Party moved to the right more and more in order to imitate and to prove, as it were, to the people of Israel that they are not less patriotic than the Likud. Apart from being, again, morally wrong and politically, useless, it's also, stupid. I put it simply as that. And I think that's the reason why they are so weak, because they try to imitate the right, and at the moment it is the same. They didn't raise any voice against the assault. They didn't raise any voice against the war. They just joined forces with the others, including in voting for the emergency government in the parliament. So obviously, there are some individual members of the Knesset, for instance, there which I really respect and like personally. There's one of them is an anti-occupation, parliamentarian. He's not an activist on the ground, but he's indeed an anti-occupation parliamentarian, one of the very few that there are. But now, again, he joined forces with the others because of the situation and because of the history of labor that I just, pointed at. There's another member of the Labour Party at the Knesset who is very activist and a great parliamentarian as far as labor and workers' rights are concerned. But as a whole, there's no hope from the Labour Party in that matter. In other things, perhaps yes. The Histadrut, which is the biggest trade union in Israel,
Yeah.
And again, we don't have the time to go to history and to analyze what the Histadrut has done, because there are at least 2 fallacies within the Histadrut since it was established exactly 100 years ago in 1920. And but I won't do that because obviously we don't have the time. But unfortunately, we as a Communist Party have ran into elections in the Histadrut. We are part of the coalition at the moment. But the chairperson of the Histadrut is a right-wing person. Not only that he will never raise any kind of voice against the war, he also refused to do anything against the coup d'etat at the time. So there are no expectations for as far as the Histadrut is concerned. There are some other smaller trade unions, but very small. When I haven't heard anything from them in regard to the war. So although I am a socialist, and I consider myself even to be a revolutionary socialist, at the current situation in Israel, the labor structure and the class structure and the labor movement are not the ones from which ending the war will come from, unfortunately, but that's the truth.
Yeah.
One thing that I was curious about that you had said earlier, and that I've seen headlines about, and relates to some of your discussion about the potential for further violence, was the distribution of weapons. And Israel, I think if anybody has ever spent time within Israel or the Israeli territories, there are soldiers with guns everywhere. Seeing guns in public on uniform, held by people in uniform, is very common. Much less common unless you are in the settlements that are over the Green Line in internationally recognized Palestinian territory. You'll see some people have personal weapons, but Israel does not have a culture of personal gun ownership. And so when I saw the videos and photos of weapons getting handed out, in the settlements, but also more broadly through the country. It struck me as also that that is just one of some of what are probably the other kind of material shifts that are happening within the country that may enable, further violence to the point of genocide.
Absolutely, as I said before, and thank you for giving me the chance to, to strengthen this argument. And I hope that as many people as possible are, listening to us at the moment in general, at this moment specifically. I'm very afraid of a real civil war within Israel because of that. There are organized, trained militias, fascist militias, people who are close to the Kahanist ideas that are now not only trained, but also armed to the teeth and also equipped with specific targets. That's a prescription to an eruption of violence within Israel. So in addition to the war in Gaza, to the bloodshed and ethnic cleansing in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, to the risk of another front in the north and beyond. Again, I hope not. There is a serious risk, and to some extent, perhaps this is the greatest danger, that within Israel proper, especially in the so-called mixed cities, that is to say, those cities that before the Nakba, before 48, the majority of them were Palestinians, and after the Nakba, the majority is Jewish, but there's a relatively big Palestinian minority. In those specific cities, there are trained, armed, and fascist, racist militias waiting for the right time to attack. And if, alas, something like that happens, and the green light from the government, specifically from the minister so-called of internal security, which is very ironic, to call him under after what I just said. So they also they already have the green light. The danger is there. The danger is seriously there. And everybody knows that if something like that happens, and that's the end of Israel. And again, everybody accuses me of being anti-Israeli and etc. No, everything I'm saying is for the good of the Israelis as well. Of course, for the Palestinians as well. But I do care about the Israeli society. And I'm afraid that this government, those bigots, are going to lead the Israeli society into destruction. And if I don't open my mouth because everybody wants me to shut up, so I will be irresponsible, and then I'll be anti-Israeli. If I shut up, I'll be anti-Israeli. Because I am not, because I care for Israel and its society, I open my mouth and taking the risks.
This is a bit of a personal question, I guess, but let's say hypothetically one were to be going on Piers Morgan's show tomorrow and appearing on Piers Morgan's show right after Ehud Barak, and we'll be addressing things that Ehud Barak said on said show. What would you say to Ehud Barak? I don't know what he's going to say. I know that he's critical of Netanyahu, obviously. Many are for different reasons, some political. What would you say his contribution was to the ongoing conflict in his time in office as the former prime minister?
I would have said that Ehud Barak is one of the main responsibles for the current situation for mainly two reasons. Well, first, once he declared that there's no partner, you all remember that he declared that there was no partner on the Palestinian side. Once he declared that, he paved the way to the most vicious, fanatic right wing that we see now in power. He actually bears a lot of responsibility for that, in saying this irresponsible and, of course, untrue statement that as if there was no partner. That's one thing. The other thing, is the massacre of Palestinian citizens in October 2000. He was the prime minister. It is his own responsibility. So I think, although more than 20 years have passed ever since, we cannot ignore the contribution, the negative contribution he made to the current situation. And it's a shame. It's a shame. What can I say? I think that he must, refer to it. He needs to say that he was wrong and to take another direction. The direction that I took, at least, I do not expect him to do so. But if you ask me, hypothetically, what would I have said? So that's what I would have said.
What were the conditions in '99 that were so different, in your opinion, that allowed the break to happen in Netanyahu's reign? Which
break? I think I missed something.
I'm saying, what do you think the conditions were for how Ehud Barak rose to power? Like, what do you think was different at the time politically, if anything at all?
First, when Barak was elected, it was about 4 years after the assassination of Rabin, and the Israeli society was still, although 4 years it's quite a lot, I think that to some extent, at least, the Israeli society was still hurt or even shocked because of this assassination. And I think that it was more ready to give a possibility both for peace and for those who were supposed to bring that peace. At the time, many Israelis also blamed, and justly so, Netanyahu for the assassination. Blamed, of course, not that Netanyahu pulled the trigger, but that he actually allowed it in incitement, and either by being silent vis-a-vis others' incitement or by inciting himself. So I think those were the conditions that allowed Barak to be more to get more support vis-a-vis Netanyahu, vis-a-vis Sharon. Doesn't matter, although there were of course differences. So I think that was different. And what happened today is that, first of all, there's a new generation that doesn't even know about Rabin. There were some docos on Israeli telly in some articles published a few years ago, and they realized that many youngsters in Israel don't know who Rabin was, and some even thought that Rabin was a prime minister that was assassinated by leftists. So I'm not saying that this is the common way of thinking, but some did. So, and I wish it was funny. I mean, I understand you, but for me it's very painful. Anyway, so those 30 years since the assassination, 20 years since the no partner statement of Barak, and the second Intifada, which was a very vicious one with many deaths, and the death toll of Israelis was terrible. And of course, thereafter, the invasion and incursion to Jenin by Israel, so many things that happened ever since. And I must say, and I said that before, that the international community bears a lot of responsibility for the ongoing confrontation and occupation, because had the international community forced Israel to end the occupation, Israel would have had no chance, no other choice. Just look at how many times, for instance, the Security Council of the UN wanted to accept some decisions, against Israeli atrocities and mal behavior, and the United States vetoed. And so in that sense, the United States has a lot of responsibility for the ongoing situation. And unfortunately, it doesn't seem that Biden and his administration are going to change anything. sending battleships to the Middle East is not the way to reach peace. I said before, what is the way to reach peace? And by the way, I must say another thing, with your permission. Many people say, how can you still believe in peace after the massacre that Hamas did? How you can still look at those beasts, and believe that they are peaceful people? So, of course, without getting into the well-known discussion regarding colonialist racism and and the attitude towards the indigenous as if they were barbaric. We all know that colonialism is based on such perceptions. There are so many books and texts on that, and experiences, first and foremost. So without referring to that, because such a saying, of course, is indeed a well-known colonialist, perception in its reference to the barbaric, quote unquote, of course, indigenous. But there's another thing. The Palestinian people and the Hamas are not one and the same. The Hamas are Palestinians, but the Palestinians are not Hamas. And so I think, and I said it in a few occasions, that the real way to get rid of Hamas, and indeed I want to get rid of Hamas, especially by the way for the benefit of the Palestinians, because they suffer from Hamas in Gaza. Hamas rule is a dictatorial, murderous system vis-a-vis the Palestinians in Gaza, before we talk about the massacre they did in Israel. I don't want Hamas to be there, but the way to get rid of them is political. What do I mean by that?
Yeah,
we have to distinguish between the ideological hardcore and the masses, the grassroots. The ideological hardcore will probably stay and won't change its mind, but the support for the Hamas is going to be stronger or weaker according to the circumstances that to a great extent Israel creates. If the Palestinian people would have had hope, if they knew that the occupation is going to be over soon, that there is a move towards it, that they are going to enjoy their own sovereign independent state, then we would have not supported Hamas. By the way, it's not a theoretical issue. Look what happened after the Oslo Accords, without getting to the discussion whether they were good or bad. But when people still believed, even if they were wrong, that's not the issue now. When Palestinians believe in 1993 that the Oslo Accords are going to materialize into independence and ending the occupation, that was the point where Hamas was at its weakest situation. People left Hamas because they had hope. When Hamas became stronger, when the hope went out of the door, So that's what we have to do. That's what Israel, with the support of the international community, must do. Bring hope for both Israelis and Palestinians. When you bring hope, the bigots of both sides are going to get weaker and weaker and eventually disappear.
You brought up a great point about the international community's responsibility in the violence that's ongoing, that both Israelis are facing and, of course, Palestinians are facing every day. And one parallel that I want to ask you as someone in Israel is, do you see a parallel between this and the anti-apartheid resistance that was happening globally in the Western world, specifically against South African apartheid, and the international community pressure finally causing that dam to break beyond the personal means, like beyond the individual acts that the ANC took? I mean, specifically Western involvement on the ground. Do you feel as though there is a parallel there? Do you feel like a robust BDS movement could potentially force pressure in the Western world to make Western leadership take actions that are more critical?
Of course, there are many similarities, and there are obviously some differences, because it's not the same. It's not the same geopolitical situation, and it's not the same era. So there are many differences. The struggle against apartheid, let's not forget, was during the Cold War. It was very influential and very relevant. So now we are not there. And so there are many differences. But there are many similarities. There's one thing that I would like, with your permission, to really say to the supporters of BDS and others. First of all, I do support international pressure on the Israeli government to end the occupation and reach a peaceful solution that is, again, for the benefit of all, Israelis and Palestinians alike. There's one thing that should be indicated very clearly. Anti-Semitism is unacceptable. Anti-Semitism is a crime like any other racism. There is a slogan which I endorse. Anti-Semitism is a crime. Anti-Zionism is a duty. I accept that. And unfortunately, there are two groups who are infected with anti-Semitism within the BDS movement, and that should be treated. One group is a group that simply doesn't really know or is not aware enough of the differences between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism or anti-occupation. This is up to us to elaborate the differences. There's another group that is anti-Semitism as a kind of an illness that does not have a remedy. Those people should not be part of the BDS. They should be expelled of the BDS. We must not cooperate with anti-Semites, even if they are against occupation, because anti-Semitism is a disgusting illness and crime, just like any other racism. And I think that the BDS should be very aware of that. First of all, because it's morally compelling, and secondly, because it's also counterproductive. And obviously, for me, the moral compelling issue is much more important. But I do not want to overlook as well the political context, and I want it to be productive and cooperating with anti-Semites. Again, first and foremost, it's wrong morally, and secondly, it's counterproductive.
Yeah. Do you feel, however, is there any viability to a of course not anti-Semitic movement that could start on the ground? Obviously, there are some organizations out here. I don't know if you're familiar with them, like Jewish Voice for Peace, and also
Sure.
If Not Now. These are two Jewish organizations
Not
that
in my
are
name.
at the forefront. Yeah, they're two Jewish organizations currently at the forefront of the Palestinian emancipation protests that are ongoing, demanding a ceasefire immediately, and demanding demanding an end to the occupation as well. I do not know how to continue growing these sorts of movements here in the United States, and I don't know what level of organizing we have to engage with in an effort to possibly put some pressure on our governments here in the Western world, so that they can go and do their duty, their moral duty.
Must tell you, first of all, I must tell you something that I'm a bit, to say the least, disappointed by, but that doesn't mean that I totally lost hope. I appealed to Senator Bernie Sanders a few months ago in regard to what we talked before about the pogroms, and I asked his assistance by addressing the president and saying that those pogroms are getting from bad to worse. That's going to bring an explosion in the area. Unfortunately, that's exactly what happened. And again, I'm not saying that there's any kind of alibi, as a matter of speaking, to what Hamas did. No, nothing can justify it. Not the pogrom, the occupation. I said that, but I will say that time and time again to be very, very clear. But unfortunately, I haven't got any reply from Senator Sanders, although I did appeal to his assistance, and that's quite disappointing. Now, if you or anyone else has the channels to address congressmen, senators, governors, celebs that are ready to get involved in mass protest and campaign, just like was in regard to the apartheid in South Africa, then we can begin something. And I think that the possibilities are there. We just have to find a way to use them and to get them. As far as I'm concerned, I'm ready to go wherever is needed to pursue it. Because as I said before, I am totally committed to the well-being of the Palestinians and the Israelis alike. I'm part of the Israeli society. I'm not alienated to it. I find it difficult to be there. I'm hurt. I'm not happy in being probably the most hated person in Israel at the moment. It's not something that I'm happy about it, to say the least. But I see myself as struggling for my society as well, because fighting for justice is not a theoretical or an abstract issue for me, although I'm coming from the academia, so some people may say that it is, but it's not. My struggle for justice is for the well-being of people, and my compatriots in Israel are people, and I care about them, even if they hate me. So I won't give up, and I do whatever what is needed everywhere. Send me everywhere. I go to the moon for that.
Oh, do you have any other questions?
No, I feel like we've taken, this has been a tremendous conversation.
Yeah. Time, you just, flow.
Well, thank you so much for coming on, Dr. Cassif. This was a wonderful
Thank you
conversation.
so much for the chance to raise my voice, and I hope, I don't know how many people are following. I hope as many as possible, and that everybody will absorb the things we said.
Thank you for coming on, and Noah, thank you for putting this together in such short notice.
My pleasure. Take it easy. Good night, everybody.
My pleasure.
All right.
And thank you indeed, Noah. And my pleasure.
Bye,
have a good night.
All right, that was a very interesting conversation. I hope that was enlightening for many of you. But once again, I want to hear different perspectives, and now followed up with Amy Schumer. Yeah, I didn't want to ask him about Amy Schumer. But yeah, that was really good. That was a member of the Knesset. Yes, it's a voice that often doesn't get a lot of coverage, and he has been, Dr. Cassif has been at the forefront of criticisms against the apartheid, against the occupation. He has demonstrated, like I said, courage and moral clarity from the jump, even before. And that's the type of perspective that you have when you are close in proximity to the violence. And of course, it's one that I think Americans forget about, because we're so far removed from it. So for us, it's just something we see on television. It's crazy that, like, you can literally be an Israeli member of the Knesset, and you can't even explain your position without having to make a ton of qualifications. Like, everybody knows that this violence is abhorrent, but it is so permanently baked into the conversation that, like, the moment that you shift the attention away from violent retribution to, hold on, it seems like there is a problem with the way that we have continued to manage the situation, constantly increasing the violence, and maybe there is a better way for our own security. You have to still say so much. You have to qualify it so many times. Like, when it goes without question,